Well, hey, welcome to Terra Nova. How you guys doing? Man, I'm excited. We are in part 2 of this series that we kicked off last weekend called The Doubters Club. We began last week with a question. It's an honest question. Do you ever have doubts? Do you ever wonder? Do you ever have questions like the really big questions? And over the years, I've noticed that there seems to be like some people who have these unwavering beliefs, and they always have, and they never really question things. And then there are others who seem to have always struggled with faith, maybe people wired up a little bit more like me, natural-born skeptics and cynics. We doubt and question pretty much everything all the time. And then there are always, in a setting like this, there are some people who, because of a stage of life, you are gaining faith. You're in a season of life where you're coming to faith. And then perhaps there are people who, because of the stage and situation of your life, are on the other side of that, maybe losing faith. There are things that they once believed or were taught or were told or assumed, and now because of things that have happened in their life and experiences that have happened, they don't know if they still believe those things or not. And if that's you, or if it's ever been you, if you've ever questioned and wondered and doubted, is it really true? I've got some great news for you. You actually have something in common with the very first followers of Jesus, because as we said last week, 100% of the first followers of Jesus doubted. They were the founding members of the Doubters Club. In fact, there's a great scene that happens at the end of one of the biographies of Jesus' life. It's written by a guy named Matthew. Matthew has his own really great story. And Matthew had walked away from religion earlier in his life, but he found himself very attracted to this guy, Jesus, who was unlike any of the religious people or religious leaders that he had ever met. And so when Jesus asked Matthew to follow him, Matthew jumped at the chance, and he became a disciple or a follower of Jesus, and he ends up writing one of the biographies of Jesus' life. And at the very end of his story of Jesus, he has this great moment, this great scene. It's after Easter, a number of days, perhaps a number of weeks later after that first Easter, and they're in Galilee again, where we left off last week with Jesus telling them to go. They had been in Jerusalem to go to Galilee where they would see him. And Matthew tells us they gather there to meet him, and their heads are still buzzing. They're trying to figure things out, and they see him. Now, for some of us, we think, man, if I could see, that would do it. That would, all my doubts, all of my questions erased forever. I would never doubt again. When they saw him, Matthew says, they worshiped him, but they doubted. They worshiped him, but they doubted. It's like, wait, go back to the other slide. Yep. They worshiped him, but they doubted. It's like, can that coexist? Can worship and doubt coexist in the same brain? In fact, we have this idea that faith is this all or nothing deal, that belief means this unquestioned certainty. In fact, because we have that idea, many English translations of Matthew's story of Jesus insert a word right here. They worshiped him, but some doubted, because it's the idea that can't both be happening, can it? It's like you either get it and you buy the whole thing with unquestioned certainty, or you don't. And if that's true, then I become very afraid of my own questions and doubts, maybe even ashamed of them. Or maybe I just assume, I guess I don't have that. I must not have it like other people do. They seem so certain, but not me. They're parts of the story I'm trying to figure out, or I got questions about, or I'm not really sure about. They worshiped and they doubted. And personally, I can relate to that. I love this quote we flipped up there just a second ago by Brennan Manning. He put it this way: when I get honest, I admit I am a bundle of paradoxes. I believe and I doubt. I hope and get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good. I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. I am trusting and suspicious. I am honest and I still play games. Can anybody relate to that? To feeling at times like you're this bundle of paradoxes? They worshiped, but they doubted. And what does Jesus do with something like that? What does Jesus do with a bunch of doubting worshipers or worshiping doubters? Does he shame them? Does he cut them loose? Like, you doubt, you're out. What does Jesus do with it? And this is a truly amazing moment in the story to me. You know what Jesus does to a bunch of doubting worshipers? He commissions them. He commissions them. Here's what happens next. And then Jesus said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And at this point, he's riffing this scene from Daniel 7 that they would have all known, where the Son of Man arrives at the throne of God in the clouds of heaven and receives from the one on the throne power and authority and dominion over all the nations, peoples, and languages of the earth. And his kingdom will last forever. And he's like, so that just happened. And now all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples, make followers of mine out of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them everything I've taught you. You pass on what you've received, and you teach that to them, and be sure of this, I will be with you the entire time to the very end of the age. And this scene, this moment, is sometimes called the Great Commission. And he gives them, a group of worshiping doubters, the mission to take the movement into the rest of the world. In other words, while they're still struggling to figure out what they believe about him, he 100% believes in them. And by the way, he still does. See, doubt, contrary to popular opinion, doubt is not the opposite of faith. Just as courage is not the absence of fear, faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith, my decision to trust in, not just believe that or believe about, but trust in, to lean in, to move towards God, is not the absence of doubt. I don't have to know everything to know something. I don't have to have all of the answers to have maybe a couple of them. And in fact, doubt, uncertainty, questioning, struggling can actually play a powerfully positive role in taking next steps, in having a more honest, a healthier, a stronger, a more robust, and a more humble faith. In fact, last week we looked at Peter's journey. You remember Peter who believed and then denied and then unbelieved and then wondered and then believed again. You remember Peter who believed, and then when Jesus was arrested, denied he'd ever believed. And then when he saw Jesus crucified, he unbelieved. They all did. Messiahs don't die on Roman crosses. It's the other way around. He unbelieved. And then after Easter, he wondered what in the world to believe. And then finally, over time, he believed again. But here's what I want you to see. Peter's unbelief in the middle of this journey was actually a really important positive step of faith, because Peter's first beliefs, he was so sure that Jesus was the Messiah, and he was so sure that he knew exactly what that meant. And he was wrong. He was wrong. He had beliefs that were shaped by his childhood and by things that people had told him. He had mental maps that he had been handed and what he had been taught, and he believed them. And he believed them very surely, and he was wrong. And Peter, and in fact, all of them needed to doubt that and question and struggle and wrestle and frankly, eventually unbelieve all of those ideas to ultimately arrive at a healthier, truer place of faith. And that might be true of you too. In fact, it probably is, because like Peter, we've all had mental maps, right? These mental maps about everything in life, including God and faith and reality and ultimate things, as shaped by our childhood, things that we were told and taught and handed, what we picked up along the way and how we pieced the story together. And though over time, as we grew up, we readdressed a number of those ideas that we had held in our childhood, often what we carry into our adult years regarding faith in God never actually grows up with us. And for that reason, it often doesn't have what it takes to stand up against an adult life. There are these gods of our childhood, if you will. Gods of our childhood, these ideas of God that were passed on to us, or maybe we picked up somehow, and we should doubt them. We should doubt them, we should question them, we should struggle and wrestle with them, and frankly, in many cases, we should unbelieve those gods. For example, one of the most prominent of these gods is, I call it the bodyguard God. Bodyguard God is the God who doesn't allow bad things to happen to good people. You know, bodyguard God, he's just like protecting you and you'll never get sick and you won't lose job. I mean, you might lose a job if you deserve to lose a job, but if you didn't deserve to lose the job, you're not going to lose a job, and you certainly won't have loved ones that get seriously ill or people in your life who die of cancer, and bad people will never win over you or take advantage of you because bodyguard God will protect you. Now, I'm kind of making light of that a little bit, but this one's emotional. This one gets really, really emotional. And there are many, many intelligent people and great people and sincere people and well-meaning people who have walked away from, or at least stepped away from God and from faith because of their pain and loss, or because of the pain and the loss of their loved ones. And what's interesting to me is that absolutely none, zero of the first followers of Jesus believed in this God. They would kind of look at us a little sideways, I think, and if we, in our struggle with bodyguard God, none of them believed in bodyguard God because they knew that bad things happen to good people. Often precisely because they're good people trying to do the right thing in a wrong world, bad things are going to happen. In fact, the Jesus movement started, as we said last week, with something horrible happening to the best person they had ever known. The best person they had ever seen in an act of incredible injustice and brutality. And so they just assumed that similar things would happen to them. And in fact, Jesus had told them that similar things would happen to them. And they did happen to them. They were right. And for the first 300 years of the Jesus movement, Jesus followers around the world lived often as outsiders, as oppressed. They lost land and property and rights and often their own lives. And they believed that they were living in an evil world filled with pain and death and tragedy and injustice, and that they, and in fact, we are here as part of the cure. Like, that's why we're here, to do good and act justly and love mercy and right wrongs in the world, especially when bad things are happening around us and to us. It's like, yeah, that's why we're here. And yet, many of us acquired or inherited this belief in this bodyguard God, a belief that somehow if we do all the right things, if we're good people, if our families are trying to do the right things, then bad things really should not happen to us. God will protect us. And for some of us, this was like a defining characteristic of God for you. The defining characteristic of God, as he was explained to you by maybe your pastor or your priest or your Sunday school teacher or your parents or your school or your well-meaning people in your background, that God will protect you, God will protect you, God will protect good people from bad things. And then you saw bad things happen. You saw some really, really bad things happen, sometimes to some really good people. And it just didn't seem right. It didn't seem to fit the mental maps that you had been handed. And you doubted. And you struggled with that. And you found yourself struggling to believe in God at all. Or maybe giving up on God. But here's the thing. If you've doubted bodyguard God, if you struggled and wrestled with that, that's actually good doubt. That's really healthy doubt, because that God doesn't actually exist. Now, similar to bodyguard God, here's another one. I call it vending machine God. I think this is a favorite of many. Vending machine God responds to reasonable requests when the right buttons are pushed. Like you're being good and you're doing good deeds and you went and served at the, Orange County Rescue Mission. I mean, how good is that? And you're obeying all the rules. I mean, you're doing all the right stuff and you're going to church, and then you threw some money in the plate and you're praying the right prayers. At least you're trying to pray like the right prayers and get the prayers right with the right beginning and the right ending. And then there's that faith thing, like I'm believing, right? Okay, so I'm believing and I got faith and I'm pushing all the right buttons. And vending machine God, he would respond to reasonable requests, right? I mean, all I asked for was a date. I mean, is that so hard? All I asked for was a job. All I asked for was a place to live. All I asked for was that my mom or my daughter would be healed. I mean, if there's a personal God, and if I really need something or I want something, but it's a reasonable request, I mean, God should respond to that the way we would respond. Right? But then that wasn't your experience, was it? And you asked for an answer and you heard nothing. You asked for a sign and you saw nothing. You asked for a miracle and you received nothing. And then worse, what gets worse is then you're in life group or you're in Bible study, and the person's sitting next to you and it's towards the end of the thing and somebody goes, oh, I got a praise report, which is Christian speak for something good happened. Hey, something good happened. It's like, oh, what? They go, oh, it was amazing. I was at Costco the other day and it was so packed and I just needed to get in and out and I was like, Lord, I'm in a hurry. You know how badly I need to get in. Lord. And I prayed for a parking space and I pulled up right to the front of Costco, and as I did, a car backed out from the front spot and I pulled right in, and it was a God thing, which is Christian speak for something good happened. It was a God thing, and God answered my prayer, and you're sitting next to that story and you're like, oh, good grief. Really? So you're getting the parking spaces while my child isn't being healed. And you decided that's fake. That's not real. That's not right. I struggle with that. I doubt that. I'm not sure I can believe in something like that. And if you've doubted and you've questioned and you've struggled with vending machine God, it's probably some good doubt. That actually might be some really healthy doubt. Then here's another one. I wasn't really sure what to call it. It's boyfriend God, but it could be girlfriend God. It could be BFF God, but it's the God whose presence should always be felt. It's like, oh, I just feel his presence. And it's this idea that I should always, and maybe not always, but at least often enough, feel the presence of God. And the idea is, if he's always with me, I should probably feel that, shouldn't I? I should probably feel something. And then there are these Christian songs that talk about that. It's like, oh, he's here, and we just feel his presence. And you're like, I don't really feel anything. I mean, do you? And then you're like, there's Christians who talk about just feeling God's presence, and I could just feel him. And you're thinking, is something wrong with me? And then maybe you grew up in church, like I grew up in church, and you had those cool camp moments, and then the last night of camp, and it's around the fire, and those worship moments, and those quiet time moments, and then you were talking to your friend, and they're going through something that you just went through. And you knew what to say. And it was just like this perfect moment. And you're like, I felt the presence of God. It was just so special. But then you got a little older. And you went through some really hard things. And you didn't feel anything. You couldn't feel anything. And you would read books. And you tried to read your Bible. And you tried to pray. And just didn't feel anything. And then maybe you come to a place like this and you're like standing next to somebody, they got their hands up in the air like, this is amazing. And you're right next to them going, is there something that, because they seem to be getting some kind of feeling of something that I don't think I have. And somewhere along the way, you were taught that God is with you always and he will never leave you. And maybe you thought, well, then I should feel that. I should feel that he's with me. I mean, if God is real and God is presence, I should feel his presence, right? And I don't. So maybe he's not. But here's my question. Where'd you get that? Where did you get that? Someone handed you that piece of a map. Now, just as a side note, did you know that we are generally least aware of the things that are most constant? It's really true, right? So you're never sitting in a room and the temperature's just perfect, and then you just lean over to the person next to you and go, have you noticed the temperature's just really perfect in here right now? Did you notice that? It's just perfect. You've got over a gallon of blood circulating through your body right now. What does that feel like? Can you feel that? Meanwhile, we sit on a tiny little ball that's spinning 67,000 miles per hour around the sun, and there's hardly a breeze outside. Did you know that we're often least aware of the things that are actually most constant? Now, that's not proof of anything. I'm just saying. But where did you get that expectation or that idea that you would feel the existence or the presence of God? And the answer is probably, well, you picked that up somewhere. Like somebody passed that on you, or you heard things and you put it together that way, and it set an expectation for you that if God is real, I should feel that, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel it anymore, and I'm just not sure I believe anymore. And if you've doubted and questioned and struggled with, again, like is it boyfriend God or girlfriend God or butterflies God or BFF God or whatever that is, if you've doubted and questioned that, That's probably some good doubt. Those are probably good, healthy questions. And then the fourth one is the version of God that I think we're quickest to want to run away from, but it takes the longest to escape and to extract ourselves from this. And that's guilt God. And guilt God controls through guilt and fear. If it's fun, the answer is no. If it's pleasurable, the answer is no, no. And if it's sexual, the answer is no, no, no. And how dare you for even thinking it? And this God loves you, but he doesn't really like you very much. In fact, he's usually just really disappointed in you. Just really disappointed, because it's never enough. It's never good enough. You're never working hard enough, whatever you do or refrain from doing. But here's the question. Where did that come from? How did you get that? Who passed that on to you? What pastor or priest or school or church or parents, or maybe it's just part of your personality. I think personality might play a really big role in this, but you maybe grew up in an environment where there was a lot of religion and there was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of religion and there was a lot of shame, and eventually over time, the two just became synonymous for you. Guilt and God, God and guilt, they just go together, and you got tired of feeling guilty, so you just quit God. I mean, that just seems like common sense. But then, like for many of us, we can't escape it so easily. It like sticks to us like gum on the bottom of our shoe. It's like that shame, that guilt is still there. Or maybe it's not quite the guilt God for you, but really similar for me. It was like there was a lot of religion and there were a lot of rules. And the rules almost always had something to do with God, and the rules didn't even make sense. But it was religion and rules and religion. And I got so tired of the rules and the rules not making sense that I thought, well, then I don't want to have anything to do with God, because that is just all about rules. But whatever that is, if you've doubted that, if you've questioned that, if you've pushed back against that and perhaps stopped believing in guilt God and rules God, that's probably healthy. Those are probably good doubts. And by the way, if you haven't quit believing in this God, I hope someday you do. Now one more, and here's an area where I think Christians and Christianity in particular over the last 3 generations have done a horrible job. And this one is called anti-science God. Anti-science God, which forces us to exchange the undeniable for the unreliable, that forces us to choose between what seems like undeniable science and facts and what feels like unreliable religion. And so it's like, I know what I was taught in Sunday school, and like maybe what my grandma said or my mom said or what those little books that we were reading said. And now I hear what they're saying in high school and in college and in university, and what I'm reading and what I'm seeing and what I'm discovering in the physical world. And that seems undeniable. I mean, the scientific data or the facts or what we're observing, that seems kind of undeniable. I mean, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of interpretation, of course, and the interpretation is often changing, but there seems to be things that are undeniable. And then maybe you get to a point where you feel like, but religion just feels unreliable, because, I mean, that's always changing, and everybody has their own little interpretation. And then look at all the negatives associated with religion, and all the, like, you look at what religions and religious people have done and often continue to do in the world over the century, which, by the way, is one of the major arguments of the new atheists. And you're asking me to ignore the undeniable in order to embrace the unreliable. And listen, if you're intellectually honest, you can't really do that. I mean, you can't really get over that hump. But the message you grew up, or the message that you heard as you began to raise these grown-up questions of that childhood God, the questions, the answers you would hear go like this, like, you just need to quit thinking and start believing. You need to quit all that thinking and start believing. And you got Sunday school answers to your grown-up questions. Like, that's what faith is. Faith is not knowing and believing anyway. A new atheist, best-selling author Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, says this: one of the truly bad effects of religion is that it teaches us that it's a virtue to be satisfied with not understanding. Not understanding, that's what faith is all about. And I just got to say, I am against that religion too. But maybe your Sunday school God, here's the thing, your Sunday school God, or at least the way you understood it or put it together, maybe that cannot be reconciled with science. But here's the deal. God or science is a false dilemma. It's a false dilemma fallacy, or sometimes called an either-or fallacy. It is a false binary. It is not a choice. And one of the things we've done a terrible job of, especially again in the last few generations as Christians, is we've created this false dichotomy. We've picked a bunch of battles that really weren't battles to have chosen, and we fought very hard in them, and we've sent kids to college and university and grad schools with this false sense of conflict between science and God. And if you've ever felt forced away from God or forced to choose between what you're observing and God, because of something you heard in a biology class or an anthropology class or an astronomy class or a physics class, and you felt like you had to choose between that and God, I am just so sorry. The irony is this. The incredible irony is that historically, before the last few generations, Christians have believed that God is actually the one who created all of this physical world, and all of this, that matter and science are actually his domain. In fact, as philosopher Arthur Holmes says, all truth is God's truth. All truth is God's truth. You never have to choose between God and something that's true, which is such a great statement because, of course, it is. Like, what other truth could there be, really? And historically, God followers have believed that the whole earth is full of his glory. The whole earth is full of his glory, that God is everywhere. His glory is everywhere. He is the God of everything. And so they expected to find God and his glory everywhere they looked, and truth everywhere they looked, in unexpected places. In fact, modern science and the whole scientific method, began with a group of Christians who were what they called people of two books. They were people of two books. And the giants of the scientific revolution, Newton and Galileo and Descartes and Kepler, they all regarded nature as a book that was written by God. And they had two books, the scriptures and science and nature, that informed and complemented each other. And they actually felt obligated, like their beliefs mandated science and discovery, because we are to know and love and wonder at what God has done and how God has done it. And that's why they began the process they began. Now, don't miss next week. We're going to pick that up right there. But here's the thing. Bodyguard God, vending machine God, and boyfriend God, and guilt God, and anti-science God, and we could just go on and on and on, really. American nationalism God, Western liberal democracy God, conservative Republican God, anti-women God. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. But here's the truth. All of these little g gods, all of them are frankly too small. They're all too small to stand up to reality as we know it, too small to handle the vast array of beauty and horror, glory and evil that we experience and struggle through in this world, too small to make sense of the universe as it actually is, and too small to deserve our deepest worship and allegiance. As the old saying goes, if it fits in a spoon, it's probably not the ocean. And these gods are just too small, and doubting them, struggling with them, and questioning and wrestling with our childhood ideas, as actually, it's a positive thing. That doubt can actually be the gift that your faith needs to grow up and be healthier and stronger and more honest and more humble. Now, there's a story in the Hebrew Scriptures that for centuries has shaped God's people's understanding of exactly what faith and the journey of faith is all about. It's a story of a man named Jacob. Jacob, his name literally means the one who grabs a heel, which was a Hebrew idiom for a schemer, a con man, a trickster, somebody who just trips you up, right? Which, as it turns out, is exactly the kind of guy that Jake was. It's funny how labels can sometimes shape you. And Jacob deceives and schemes his way through his life. He deceives his older brother Esau out of the family blessing and then out of the family inheritance. And his brother, who's like he's the tough guy, he's the hunter-gatherer warrior type, He vows that as soon as their dad dies, he is going to kill his little brother. He is going to kill Jacob. And Jacob hears that, and he takes off on the run, running north out of what we would consider modern-day Israel, up to southeast Turkey, an area called Haran, which is just north of Syria and modern-day Syria in southeast Turkey. And he lives there 20 years. And 20 years later is where our story picks up. 20 years later, the con man, the schemer, Jacob has run out of tricks. His just life and consequences, and especially getting out-schemed. Out-schemed again and again by a world-class schemer that just happened to be his father-in-law, a guy named Laban, who takes him on a run for 20 years, and that has just broken him down over time. And sometimes I think being on the receiving end of our own kind of dysfunctions, having them kind of turn around on us can soften us and bring us to some reality. And that's what happens to Jacob. And he decides he needs to return home and face his brother Esau, which is a big, courageous decision for Jacob because he's been running and gaming his whole life. And maybe you know people like that. Maybe you are a person like that. Like never, ever has he stood and faced the consequences and the damage that he causes. He's never stood face to face with someone whose life he's just messed with. And he decides he's going to go home. And he's going to face his brother Esau, and he is going to make amends or die trying, and there's a good chance that he just might do that. And so he loads up his 2 wives. He's got 2 wives. That's another story of the scheming father-in-law, how Jacob got outplayed. He's got 11 sons. He's got a bunch of kids. He's got servants, livestock, possessions. There's this big caravan as he loads them up, and they begin this slow journey south out of modern-day Turkey into what would be modern-day Israel. And then he sends a couple of messengers ahead to find his brother, Esau, and just leak the news that Jacob's coming home. And when Esau hears that, he saddles up immediately to meet Jacob on the way with an army of 400 men. And Jacob is freaked. He is so scared, and he prays this great prayer in Genesis 32. And then after praying this prayer, he jumps into action, and he divides up all of his livestock and servants, and he sends them off in 2 completely different directions. His thought is, if one of them gets attacked by my brother, the other one will probably survive, right? And then he takes a big portion of his herds, and he sends them ahead with some servants towards where Esau is coming from as a gift to Esau to appease him and make amends, but also to slow him down. Always the schemer, always finding the angle, right? And then lastly, after all of that has been done, he takes his wife and his kids across the river, the Jabbok or the Yabok, and then as night falls, Jacob returns back to their camp all alone. And now it's just him and his thoughts and his anxiety and his fear. And in the middle of the night, Jacob is assaulted by this unknown attacker who comes into the camp. And the whole story is so mysterious. Like Jacob has no idea who this man is who jumps him and starts wrestling him. We are never told in the story exactly who this is. He just attacks them. And the 2 are fighting all night long, and the man will not leave Jacob alone. And Jacob, in fear of his life from his brother Esau, he decides on this particular night he is not going to back down. He's not going to try to game his way out of this. And so he just latches on, and then the story gets a little strange. When Jacob won't give up and the sun is beginning to rise, the man touches Jacob's hip and dislocates it. Now, Jacob has had an experience or 2 by this point in his life with God or with angels or messengers from God. And in this moment, it's like he realizes there is something going on here that isn't normal. There is more to this battle than I thought. And the man says, again, something very mysterious, the sun is coming up. The sun is coming up. You need to let me go. It's like he doesn't want to be seen. Why? Who is this guy? And Jacob, realizing there's something more to this man than meets the eye, realizing there's something more to this moment than meets the eye, Jacob answers, not until you bless me. Not until you bless me. I am not going to let you go until you bless me. Now, this has been a part of Jacob's story his whole life. Always looking for the blessing, always looking for the angle, always looking for the advantage. But tonight, fearing for his life, facing his past for the first time, Jacob wants a blessing, and the man agrees. Now, blessing in their culture was very personal. It was a very personal thing. It was often built around the meaning of a person's name or a play on the meaning of their name. And so the man asks them, "What is your name? You want to be blessed? What is your name?" But you get the sense that whoever this is, he already knows who Jacob is. He's known who Jacob was the entire time, but it's like he wants Jacob to say it. It's like he wants Jacob to disclose the name, the label he's been living with his entire life. And Jacob says, schemer. Schemer, that's my name. I'm the one who grabs the heel. I'm the con man. I'm the trickster. I'm Jacob. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because instead of just building a blessing around Jacob's name, the man changes his name, changes his identity, changes his label, and in the process actually changes his identity and says, your name will no longer be Jacob. Your name is no longer schemer. No one will call you deceiver anymore. You are Israel. Israel, because you have struggled with God and with man and have overcome. You're not schemer. You are wrestles with God. That's who you are, because you've wrestled with God and man, and you have overcome. Wow. And then Jacob says, well, now tell me your name. And again, adding to the mystery, he will not disclose it. Why do you want to know my name? And the man blesses him and vanishes from the story as mysteriously as he arrived. And so Jacob called the place Peniel, we're told at the end of the story, which means face of God, saying, it is because I saw God. Is that who he saw? We don't know. He saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. And the sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Because though he wrestled with God and overcame, God has left his mark on him permanently. And as he limps, he goes out with this newfound courage, this newfound humility, a deeper character to meet his brother Esau. It is one of the most beautiful, made-for-movie moments in the Hebrew scripture as these two brothers get reconciled. Genesis 33, you should read that for yourself. But here's this strange story, and no doubt for Jacob, a.k.a. Israel, a life-changing story, but on a bigger scale. This story we just looked at shaped the identity of a nation whose very name was wrestles with God. Wrestles with God. This identity actually became a part of the foundation of their relationship with God. And for centuries, rabbis and teachers would look back at that story and retell that story as a metaphor for their own wrestling, for their own struggles to understand the scripture and life and God and reality and fighting with God and not letting go. And they would write psalms, this beautiful collection of prayers that are found in the Hebrew scriptures that describe this wrestling, this struggle to understand who God is. Psalms of lament, psalms of faith, but struggle and questioning. And later, the rabbis would speak of wrestling with God and not letting go and walking away limping. And they had a saying that there are people who have no limp because they have not wrestled. And this was their picture. This is their picture, get this, not of doubt. This was their picture of faith. This is what faith looked like, a healthy faith that wrestles with God. A healthy faith is not necessarily one that's all clean and simple and settled and safe, where all of the questions have easy answers and you've got them all memorized. No. For them, and I believe for us, a healthy faith wrestles, struggles, questions, refuses to let go, and very often walks away limping and marked by it, wrestling to understand truth, to understand reality, to bring these two in alignment, to understand what's true and real, and at the same time to understand what is false in me and in my ideas and in my mental maps, because a healthy faith demands a deeper alignment. A healthy faith wrestles with God because a healthy faith It demands a deeper alignment. I love this line in Psalm 51. It says this. In fact, since we're wrapping up, I thought we would read this line out of Psalm 51 together. Will you read it with me? It's a very famous line. Let's say it together. Surely you desire truth in my inmost being. In the secret places of myself, you have made me to know wisdom. Now, wisdom is a key word. Wisdom is a key word in the Hebrew Scriptures. It refers to a life that is aligned with reality. And there's this picture in the book of Proverbs of God creating everything, and he's woven wisdom through the fabric of all that exists. And to be a wise person is to be the kind of person who lives in alignment with reality and with how God created things to be. I want truth in my inner being. I want wisdom in the secret places. I want truth in my mental maps. I want truth way down deep in those parts of me that are often not really even conscious. I want deep inner alignment between what I say I believe and what I want to believe and what I truly actually believe. And I don't just want my statements to be true and accurate. I want my mental maps. I want my operating system to be true and accurate. As we said last week when we kicked off the series, we're all believers. We all believe something. In fact, we all believe many, many things, holding in our minds these ideas of the way things are, these mental maps, and we live by our faith in those ideas. We live by our trust in how we've put the world together, not what we say we believe, but what we actually believe. But because a lot of those ideas we have way down beneath are inconsistent and conflicting, we are very often inconsistent and conflicting. And a blind faith and a shallow faith and an intellectually dishonest faith might not mind that so much, might just ignore that inconsistency and that conflict. But healthy faith wrestles with it. A healthy faith says, no. I want alignment. I want truth in my inner self. I want to sift through all of those faulty ideas and beliefs that I've patched together that are not really good and not really true and not really healthy. In fact, some of them are straight up toxic. And I want to get rid of those beliefs. And I want my whole life to be increasingly in alignment with what is true and what is noble and what is right and what is pure and what is admirable and what is lovely. Like, don't you want that? Don't you want that kind of alignment? Of course you do. And here's this question. How do you get that? How do you get that kind of, like that deeper alignment? I mean, that really is the question, isn't it? And the answer is, don't miss the next series, Truth Be Told, kicking off on Mother's Day in just 2 weeks. And we're going to pick it up right here next weekend as we wrap up Doubters Club. But let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you that you have broad enough shoulders to handle our doubt. You are big enough to handle all of our questions and our struggles and our wrestling with you. You are bigger than all of our ideas of truth and the things that we are struggling with. And I just make it my prayer, and maybe the prayer of many, if not all of us who are sitting here today, that we want alignment with that. Not with ideas that we've necessarily held or ways that we've pictured you or put you in a box, but we want deep, deep inner alignment with what is true and noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable, with who you are and what you're actually all about. And I pray that for myself and for all of us here, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Hey, this is good stuff. I'm really enjoying what we've been talking about and where we're going next week with the series. And if you found this helpful, or if you got somebody in your life where you go, man, I'm sure they would connect with just this approach with looking at faith and connecting with God, don't hesitate to invite them out to a service. Or even one of the things you can do is we've got all of our messages online. We've got them on our YouTube channel. And so you can always share what we're talking about with somebody in your life. And so you can do that on our YouTube channel. But as we're winding down today, a few things just to let you know about. One is, as Lyle mentioned before, we love getting a Connect card from everybody every single week. And so if you've got that, either the paper copy or on your Terra Nova app, you can put the finishing touches on that. We love hearing from everybody, and so spend a little bit of time working on that right now. And if you're part of the Terra Nova family, one of the things that we seek to do as a church community is live lives that are marked by generosity and selflessness, where we're always looking outside of ourselves, looking just to extend God's love and grace with people in our lives. And so one of the ways that we can do that is just by giving, by working together, by using our collective resources, knowing that we'll always be able to accomplish so much more together than we would on our own. And so one of the things that we can do just to support that mission of making God's love famous is just to be able to give. And so we've got offering envelopes around. We can always give online or on our Terra Nova app. But one of the things that we've got coming up that's just going to be a great expression of making God's love famous is an event. We talked a little bit about it last week. It's called Kids Feeding Kids. And here's what it is. It's this packing event where we come out on a Friday night and a Saturday morning. It's May 20th and 21st. And we're going to be packing 75,000 meals this year that we're going to be sending to an orphanage in Zambia. And so that's exciting. We're looking forward to it. And we've got this next month to purchase the meals, to get our resources to collectively say, hey, we're in, and here's what we're going to do with it. And so on your way out tonight, what you will see is as we go out into the lobby, there's a big table there. You can do a number of different things. First is you might already know, hey, I want to come out on that Friday night, and I want to pack meals, and I'm going to bring some neighbors with me, and you can sign up. You can just let us know when you're going to come out. Another thing that you can do is, as I mentioned, we're going to purchase these 75,000 meals, is we got a chance right now just to say, hey, let's go ahead and do it. And so you can buy meals. We've got a QR code you can scan if you want to do that on your phone, or we can take checks and cash as well. And another thing you'll notice is that we've got a bunch of these invite cards out there. Perfect event for any age. You got 2 to 92. I mean, bring them out. If you've got neighbors, if you've got little ones, if you've got kids that have got a sports team, invite the whole team out, invite work friends, whatever it is. We're going to have a ton of fun with that. And so you'll see that table out there in the lobby on your way out. And then anything that you want to leave behind, connect cards, offering envelope, anything that you want to recycle, you'll see our guest services team members have got baskets by the door, and they'll take those things from you. But don't miss next weekend. We're going to be in part 3, the finale of our series, The Doubters Club. So be back for that, and have a great week. God bless you all.